Hello everyone and welcome to Plot Twists. So today I thought I would do something a little different. In honor of the new Nicholas Sparks book, The Return, coming out, which I am so excited to read, I thought I would do a tier maker video of all of the books he's written. Nicholas Sparks is one of my favorite authors. I have read everything, almost, as you'll see today, almost everything that he's written. And so much of it is exactly what you'd expect and very different in the same way. I mean, as anyone who's even remotely familiar might know, they're all romance novels in some way, shape, or form. But in my opinion, they all have a very different plot, and some of them are very much better than others. So without further ado, let's get started. So I thought we would start with the books that I haven't read yet. So obviously The Return just came out. I haven't read that yet. I also have not read his nonfiction story, 3 Weeks with My Brother, that he wrote with his brother. And I also realized, as a result of this, that I have not read The Guardian. It's on my shelf. I at some point bought it, but I've never read it. So hopefully that'll be something I make it to in the coming months. But as I haven't read these, I'm not going to rank them, obviously. So, starting at the beginning, in terms of a general format, my plan is to give a summary of each book and then explain where I rank it and why. I'm going to do them as they're set in chronological order, starting with The Notebook and ending with Every Breath, and we'll see how this goes. Okay, so starting at the beginning with The Notebook. This is a book, if you're somehow unfamiliar and possibly at this point live under a rock. The Notebook is about two kids named Noah and Allie who date as teenagers and then break up and separate for an extended period of time. And they actually come back together many, almost 10 years after they initially first dated and rekindle their romance, but a lot has changed between them being teenagers and now. Allie is actually engaged when the story starts, and as they rekindle, there's a lot that they have to work through to make it function. This might be a little cliche, a little expected, but The Notebook is phenomenal. The movie is phenomenal. The book is even better. It's iconic. There's no other place for it to go other than best. Okay, so moving on to the second book, Message in a Bottle is about a woman named Teresa who literally finds a message in a bottle on a beach. And the message that's in the bottle is a love story, or a love letter, I guess, from Garrett to Catherine. And she is so enthralled with wanting to know where this love letter comes from that she literally tracks it down. And then, of course, there's more that happens after that. But Message in a Bottle is a pretty good book. It's kind of exactly what you would expect. There are no major plot twists, things that make it kind of interesting. So as a result, I'm going to place it as a good book. It's not great, but I would definitely reread it. Okay, so moving to the next one, A Walk to Remember, easily one of the biggest tearjerker books I've ever read. A Walk to Remember centers around Landon and Jamie. Landon is, any typical teenage boy, and Jamie is the daughter of a preacher or pastor. I don't quite remember which one. And that is not something that he is interested in any way, shape, or form. End up paired up together, I believe, as the result of a school project or maybe a play. And Landon learns a lot about Jamie's life and comes to definitely more appreciate where she comes from, but also learns that she has a life-threatening illness, and the story kind of evolves from there. A Walk to Remember is definitely up there in terms of my favorite Nicholas Sparks books. Finding out that she has a debilitating illness is a pretty big plot twist, and it adds some intrigue to the book. In addition to that, it's a great movie. Highly recommend. So we're going to place it in great. Okay, the next one that we're going to talk about is The Rescue. And this is probably a pretty unpopular opinion because it's one of the very few Nicholas Sparks books that was never turned into a movie, and I think it's a travesty. This book centers around Taylor and Denise. Denise and her son are in a car crash, a very dangerous car crash near the beginning of the book. And Taylor is the volunteer firefighter who saves them from the car. They're just instantly attracted to each other, and the story continues on, and it's just so good. It's one of, in my opinion, one of the more realistic Nicholas Sparks romances. A lot of them have fanciful elements that, I mean, they could happen in real life, but they probably wouldn't. I feel like this one, the romance in it is very natural, expected, realistic, and as a result, it's probably my favorite of all time. If not one of. Definitely best category. Okay, the next book, A Bend in the Road, centers around the sheriff in the town, Miles, and his son, Jonah. His wife has previously passed before the story starts, and Miles is struggling taking care of his son independently. And he ends up with a lot of help from Jonah's second grade teacher, whose name is Sarah, and there's kind of a relationship that forms because of that. This is one of the Nicholas Sparks books that I found very forgettable. I mean, it's not bad because very few of them do I feel are bad, but also I remember nothing. And as we go through, the ones that are clearly forgettable are probably all going to end up in wouldn't read again. Because if it wasn't important enough for me to remember the first time, it is definitely not important enough for me to reread. So, yes. Okay, so the next book, Nights in Rodanthe. This centers around Adrienne, whose husband at the very beginning of the story leaves her. So she kind of throws her life into taking care of her sick father and her kids, and her friend offers her an opportunity to take over an inn for a weekend just to kind of get away, and she definitely needs some time to relax. Her life is very fast-paced, and it's a lot to deal with. So as a result, she meets a man named Paul who is staying at the inn, and this book is basically about the weekend that they spend together on the North Carolina coastline and whether they are going to continue that after this weekend ends. I enjoyed Nights in Rodanthe. I feel like this is a book that later in life I will be able to appreciate more than I do now, because the characters in the story are in their mid-50s, and that's obviously not something I can relate to now. But even including that, it's a very good book. Yeah, good. Okay, the next book we're going to talk about is The Wedding. If you're not familiar with any of Nicholas Sparks' books, this is actually the sequel he wrote to The Notebook. Well, backing up a little bit, if you're unfamiliar, at the end of the movie The Notebook, obviously both Noah and Allie pass away. In the book, that doesn't happen, though. Allie passes away and Noah does not. And this book actually centers around their daughter and her husband, who are having some marital struggles. It also further discusses that concept of if you're a bird, I'm a bird. Noah is very convinced in this book that his wife has been reincarnated as a swan, and it leads to some very beautiful moments. As this is the only Nicholas Sparks sequel that exists, it makes sense to me why it exists as a sequel, but also it just continues a really, really great story. I'm going to place this one in good as well. The Wedding is a beautiful continuation of The Notebook, but I would say it's mostly predictable. You can tell what's going to happen at, even a couple chapters in, and as a result, I don't think I can place it any higher than good. So True Believer centers around Jeremy, who is a science journalist. He becomes super intrigued with a ghost story that's happening in a North Carolina town and goes to investigate. And as a result, meets Lexi, who is the town librarian. And this is basically all I can tell you about this book because it is another one of those I truly just don't remember. Their relationship is honestly somewhat predictable. There's not anything super memorable that happens in this book. So as a result, we're going to place this in wouldn't read again. Next book, At First Sight. I stand corrected that The Wedding is the only Nicholas Sparks sequel. This just shows exactly how much I forgot about this book. But At First Sight is actually a continuation of True Believer. In the end of True Believer, Jeremy relocates from New York City to North Carolina so that they can start developing a life together, and At First Sight just continues that. Again, unmemorable. I don't know. It is what it is. Wouldn't read again. Next book is Dear John. And this book centers around the main character whose name is also John. He, at the beginning of the book, is in the army, and he meets this girl named Savannah, and they start a life together, and things are working well, and then 9/11 happens, and he decides to re-enlist in the army, and this kind of causes their paths to diverge for a while, until he receives a letter from Savannah, and as a result, they kind of come back together and meet. Dear John is a very good book, but it is also another one of those tearjerkers, and I was very displeased at the ending. So as a result, I'm placing it in the column, acknowledging that it is definitely a good book, but I couldn't get over the ending of this book, and as a result, it kind of ruined it for me. Okay, the next book that we're going to talk about is The Choice. This centers around two characters named Travis and Gabby. Gabby moves into the house next door to Travis and kind of blows him off. She's not super interested, and Travis is laid back and like chill lifestyle kind of it causes him to be thrown for a loop because he doesn't understand why Gabby's not interested in him, and he kind of pursues it a little harder because of that. The Choice is super enjoyable. Their relationship is relatable, it's interesting, and because of how involved he is in the story, there are some very memorable moments in this book. And the movie as well, if you've seen it. So definitely going to place this one in great. Okay, the next book we're going to talk about is The Lucky One. This centers around a Marine named Logan, who in the midst of war, of his duty, finds a picture of a woman, and he is super fascinated with this picture, wants to learn everything that he can about this woman, and actually ends up tracking her down. This book is another one that we're going to place in great. There are some super memorable moments in this book, including Logan's cross-country walk with his dog to find out who this woman is. And her name is Elizabeth. And very good. Highly recommend. Also a great movie. Starring, I believe, Zac Efron. I think so. Very good. So the next book we're going to talk about is The Last Song. And I have some very strong opinions about this that I don't know how other people feel. But the main character in this book's name is Ronnie. And I feel like Ronnie was written to be Miley Cyrus, which has some pros and cons, but for me, this made it a unenjoyable read. The story is very predictable, nothing happens out of the ordinary, and the main character is just not interesting to read, in my opinion. So as a result, this is probably one of his only books that I would place and would not recommend. Okay, Safe Haven is also easily one of my favorite Nicholas Sparks books. This centers around Katie, whose husband at the beginning of the story is very abusive and a cop in the town that she's from. So in the middle of the night one night, she cuts her hair off, she dyes it, she gets on a bus and just tries to leave. And she ends up in this little itty bitty town where she meets Alex, who is a widower who runs a store in the town with his 2 little kids. This story is about their romance that develops as a result of, you know, the losses that they've both, and the trauma that they've both endured. It's very, very good. If you honestly, if you only take one book out of this list and decide that's the one I'm going to read, highly recommend it be Safe Haven. The next book that we're going to talk about is The Best of Me. And this centers around Dawson and Amanda, who were interested in each other in high school because they were set up by their friend Tuck. And the book centers around their reuniting at Tuck's funeral. I struggle with books that are sad. So just because I place it in A does not mean that it is not a good book. It just means that I don't care for it. It just has a very sad plot, and it's hard to get over a book that starts with a funeral. So I'm going to place it in the category. The next book we're going to talk about is The Longest Ride. And this one is particularly interesting because instead of centering around one character or a pair of characters, this really centers around 3. So simultaneously, you have Sophia, who is a college student, who meets Luke, who is a bull rider, and they start developing a relationship. But you also have another character whose name is Ira, and he is an older gentleman who has just gotten into a car crash and is on the side of the road, kind of drifting in and out of consciousness and remembering the things that have happened in his life. And as the story goes on, their paths cross, and it creates a really, really interesting dynamic that is previously unexplored in a Nicholas Sparks book. I really enjoyed it. Definitely would recommend putting it in the great category. Okay, the next book we're going to talk about is See Me. This centers around Maria and Colin, who are 2 characters who are very uninterested in finding romance in somebody else. But they meet each other and bond over some mutual interests and life experiences, and as a result, there's kind of a romance that develops because of that. And it's a pretty good book. It does add some interesting dynamics because Maria is both of Mexican descent and a female lawyer, and there are some interesting dynamics that result because of that. So definitely a good book. Okay, the next book that we're going to talk about is 2 by 2, and this book is so cute. It centers around Russell, who pretty close to the beginning of the story, his wife leaves him and his 2-year-old daughter, and now he has to figure out how to raise this girl on his own. And the relationship that develops between them and the things that he comes to realize as a result of the story are amazing. Definitely one of my favorites. Really enjoyed. Okay, and the last book we have to talk about is Every Breath. This centers around a character named Hope, who goes to her parents' beach cottage during the summer and meets this guy named True, who is actually from Zimbabwe. And she starts to show him around the town that they're in because his cottage is very close to hers. And they develop a pretty intense relationship as a result of some of the reasons why he ends up at the beach in the cottage. This was also definitely a good book. The culture that results from the character being from Zimbabwe is very interesting, and I enjoyed it. Okay, so real quick, as the last part of this, I think I am just going to order these. Okay, so this is my final Nicholas Sparks tier maker list. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you're interested in my content, feel free to subscribe. I try to post things once a week, if not twice a week, and I look forward to hearing if you guys had any interest in reading any of these books or how you feel about them. Anything to do with Nicholas Sparks, I'm game to talk about. So I hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you again soon.